the West Africa Economic Summit in Abuja. The air was thick with anticipation, the venue buzzing with the murmur of dignitaries and delegates. It was expected to be a routine affair, another iteration in a long series of economic discussions. The agenda, as always, was predictable. More talk of attracting foreign investment, presentations on boosting resource exports, and the usual platitudes about regional cooperation. The underlying assumption was that Africa's path to prosperity lay in deeper integration with the global economic system on terms largely dictated by external forces. But on this day, something was different. As Nigerian President Bola Tinubu took the stage, a palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere. The weight of expectation hung heavy in the air. Tinubu, long seen as a pragmatist, a seasoned political operator known for his careful diplomacy, was expected to reassure international partners. He was supposed to deliver the standard message: Nigeria remained open for business as usual, a reliable partner in the global marketplace. The world waited for the familiar reassurances. Instead, he declared, his voice resonating with unexpected force: "For too long, Africa has shipped its wealth overseas for pennies, only to buy it back at 100 times the price." The words hung in the air, a stark indictment of the existing economic order. It was a message that challenged the very foundations of the relationship between Africa and the developed world. The room fell silent, as if a switch had been flipped. The usual polite coughs and rustling of papers ceased. This was not the language of compliance, the expected deference to established power, but of defiance, a bold assertion of sovereignty. Tinubu continued, his voice rising with passion. He called for a new era, one where Nigerian resources would be the engine of Nigerian industries, where value would be added on African soil, and Africa's wealth would serve its own people, lifting them out of poverty and creating opportunities for future generations. Western diplomats, accustomed to the predictable rhythms of these summits, and corporate lobbyists, who had long profited from the existing arrangements, looked on in disbelief, their faces a mixture of shock and concern. The implications of Tinubu's words were immediately clear. But among the African delegates, especially the young, who had grown up hearing promises of progress that never materialized, Tinubu's words struck a chord. They erupted in applause, a spontaneous outpouring of hope and excitement. This was not just a policy tweak, a minor adjustment to existing regulations. It was a fundamental challenge to the post-colonial economic order, a rejection of the dependency that had defined Africa's relationship with the West for decades. Tinubu spoke of resource sovereignty, the principle that Africa's vast mineral wealth, its gold, diamonds, oil, and other resources, would be used to benefit Africa first and foremost. The old guard, the established figures who had long navigated the complexities of international relations, sat in uneasy silence, unsure of how to respond. But for many, especially the younger generation of African leaders, this was a long-awaited call to action, a moment of reckoning. The speech ended, the applause subsided, but its shockwaves had only begun to ripple outwards, spreading across the continent and beyond. For the first time in decades, Africa's largest power, a nation with immense economic and political influence, was signaling a decisive break from dependency, charting a new course towards self-determination. The continent, and indeed the entire world, would never see Nigeria, or perhaps even Africa itself, in quite the same way again. The speech had planted a seed of hope, a seed of change that would continue to grow and shape the future. Tinubu's pivot was stunning. Until now, his policies mirrored those of his predecessors, seemingly locked into a well-worn path. There was a sense of continuity, a feeling that the economic trajectory was set in stone. The established playbook was simple: attract foreign capital with promises of lucrative returns, export raw resources at bargain prices, and hope for trickle-down prosperity that would somehow reach the masses. It was a strategy that had been tried and tested, but with limited success. Nigeria's economy for decades was built almost entirely on the logic of extraction, a system where natural resources were seen as the primary, if not only, source of wealth. Oil, gas, lithium, coltan, the treasures beneath the soil were relentlessly exploited. These resources, instead of fueling domestic growth, were primarily destined for foreign markets. They were shipped out as quickly as possible, with little value added within Nigeria itself. The focus was on volume, not on creating a sustainable, diversified economy. The idea of building local industry, of transforming raw materials into finished goods within Nigeria, was often dismissed as an unrealistic dream, a fanciful notion disconnected from the realities of global trade. But at the summit, Tinubu reversed course, charting a new path that challenged the very foundations of Nigeria's economic model. He declared that export licenses for unprocessed minerals would be systematically phased out, signaling a clear shift away from the old extractive paradigm. Furthermore, incentives would be strategically directed to companies committed to building refineries and factories within Nigeria, fostering local processing and manufacturing capabilities. This was a direct challenge to the established order, to the multinational corporations that had long profited from Africa's raw value, often at the expense of local development. The new doctrine was clear. Nigeria would no longer be a mere supplier of raw materials to the global economy, but an industrial power in its own right, capable of processing its own resources and creating value-added products for both domestic consumption and export. It was a gamble, a rejection of the old, comfortable rules that had defined Nigeria's economic relationship with the world for decades. It was a bold move to write new ones, to redefine Nigeria's place in the global economic landscape, and to forge a more equitable and sustainable future. For Nigeria, it was the most significant economic shift in a generation, a potential turning point that could reshape the nation's destiny for years to come. Such a dramatic shift doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's the culmination of various undercurrents and pressures. Across Nigeria, a new generation, digitally connected and increasingly impatient, began to vocally demand change, challenging the old ways of doing things. They were no longer content with the status quo. Social media became a powerful tool, amplifying the paradox that defined the continent. A resource-rich land, overflowing with potential, yet so many of its people mired in poverty. The stark contrast fueled resentment and a burning desire for a more equitable distribution of wealth. Youth movements began to question the fundamental economic model. Why, they asked, did Africa consistently export its raw materials at low prices, only to import finished goods at significantly higher costs? This cycle of dependency became a central point of contention. The rise and influence of figures like Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, who boldly championed resource sovereignty and self-determination, resonated deeply and inspired millions across the continent. His message of taking control of their own destiny struck a chord. The formation of the Alliance of Sahel States, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, proved to many that breaking free from long-standing patterns of dependency was not just a dream, but a tangible possibility. Their actions demonstrated a pathway towards greater autonomy. Their early, albeit limited, successes in developing local processing capabilities offered a glimpse of a new path forward, one where Africa could add value to its own resources. Tinubu's move, therefore, can be seen as a direct response to this growing groundswell of public opinion and pressure, a clear recognition that the cost of maintaining the status quo had simply become too high to bear. His speech, with its emphasis on self-reliance and economic independence, echoed a revolutionary sentiment that is rapidly sweeping across the entire continent. Burkina Faso, under Captain Traoré, became a model for economic decolonization. The government halted raw gold exports and built a state-owned refinery. By refining gold locally, Burkina Faso captured more value, increased state revenue, and funded development without foreign loans. The refinery became a symbol of independence and practical self-reliance. This success proved that resource sovereignty was achievable and profitable. For Nigeria, Burkina Faso's blueprint showed that breaking free from the extractive model was not just rhetoric, but a real strategy. Nigeria is Africa's largest economy, with vast reserves of oil, gas, lithium, and more. For decades, this wealth-fueled paradox, trillions lost, communities left behind. Tinubu's doctrine could transform Nigeria from a raw exporter to an industrial hub. Imagine lithium processed into batteries, oil refined into petrochemicals, steel made from local ore. Nigeria's move gives political cover to smaller nations and shifts Africa's economic center of gravity. If Nigeria asserts its sovereignty, others can follow. The continent's future may hinge on this bold step. The world reacted instantly. In Paris, London, and Washington, officials expressed concern, publicly measured, privately alarmed. Media called the move risky and warned of capital flight. Within West Africa, ECOWAS was split. Some feared instability, others saw overdue leadership. The African Union cautiously endorsed Tinubu's vision, calling for continent-wide dialogue on value addition. For the global north, the Doctrine threatened a century-old model. For many Africans, it was a long-awaited dawn. The battle lines were drawn between dependency and sovereignty, old order and new. The impact at home could be transformative. Local processing and manufacturing promise jobs, skills, and hope for Nigeria's youth. The policy aims to attract investment in factories, not just mines. Nigerian entrepreneurs will have new opportunities to build businesses supporting industry. The vision extends beyond Nigeria. An industrialized giant could anchor a pan-African value chain. Wealth would circulate within Africa, not flow out. This is about more than economics. It's about dignity, purpose, and a future built by Africans, for Africans. A new narrative is emerging, not managing poverty, but building wealth. Tinubu's doctrine opens the door to a new West African alliance. Nigeria's scale, combined with Burkina Faso's revolutionary zeal, could reshape the region. Imagine a bloc coordinating mineral exports, sharing expertise, and setting terms with global buyers. Together, they could resist external pressure and offer a model of self-reliance for Africa. This alliance would challenge old powers and inspire others to join. The idea of a resistance economy, African wealth for African people, is no longer a fantasy. With Nigeria on board, a new axis of power is possible. Nigeria stands at a crossroads, its next steps watched by the world. The challenge: will Tinubu's government have the resolve to withstand external and internal pressures? Will other nations follow, breaking the psychological barrier of dependency? This moment feels different. A convergence of youth activism, successful defiance, and a giant's awakening. It's about dignity, self-determination, and Africa claiming its own destiny. When the continent's biggest economies listen to its boldest voices, real change begins. This is Insight Africa, where old orders fall and a new future is claimed. This is Insight Africa, where the continent doesn't wait for change, it makes it.